Then he comes to the next category. Parim hanisrafim, the bulls that were burnt, usually the sin offerings, parts of it were offered on the altar, and then parts of it were eaten by the priests. And that's what achieves the atonement. The offering it on the altar, the parts that have to be offered on the altar, and by the priest eating from the sin offerings, that's what accomplishes the atonement. But here, these bulls were burnt. It was completely burnt. None of it was eaten. Yeah, certain parts they took out and they offered on the altar, but burnt on the altar. But the rest, the whole part was burnt. There were two such examples. For example, if the Jewish Supreme Court made a mistake. It happens. We're all human. They made a ruling, and they made a mistake, a ruling in relation to a sin, which the sin is, if you violate this prohibition, you get cut, your life gets cut off. And they made a mistake. And everyone, the majority of the Jewish people followed the erroneous ruling of the Jewish Supreme Court. It's the ultimate authority. They ruled, so everyone followed. And then they say, oh, we made a mistake. We made a wrong ruling. So the high court and every tribe had to bring a bull called Pad Helam Davar Shel Tzibur, and they had to, as an atonement for this terrible sin, this collective national sin that was done by the majority of the Jewish people, which they innocently, they followed the ruling of the Jewish Supreme Court. If you can't rely on the Jewish Supreme Court, who in the world could you rely on? And the Torah tells you to follow the rulings of the Jewish Supreme Court. They're honorable and they're the highest level. But they made a mistake. So this is the atonement for their mistake. The reason he says in the plural, simply because there's an opinion that they only brought one bull. Only the court would bring a bull. Not every tribe had to bring a bull. But the other reason he says parim is because there's also another scenario. If a high priest makes a ruling for himself, he can rely on himself. He's the foremost spiritual expert, authority in the land. So there was an issue about a mitzvah, which the penalty is kares if you get it wrong, and he made a ruling erroneously, and he followed his own ruling, and then it turns out he was wrong. So he doesn't bring a regular sin offering like a regular Jew. He's the high priest. He has to bring a special, intense, powerful sin offering, which is this bull, and it was burnt. It was completely burnt. None of it was eaten. Then he says, U'si'irim. Si'ir is referring to if the mistake that the high court made was a mistake in relation to idolatry, about the sin of idolatry. If they made a wrong ruling about idolatry, then the Supreme Court, Jewish Supreme Court, they made an erroneous ruling, which the majority of the Jewish people followed. Then they realized their mistake, so they have to bring a he-goat as an atonement. In the case, if a high priest made a ruling about when it comes to idolatry, then he's like any other Jew. A personal, private Jew made a mistake and he brings a female goat as an atonement. So why then does he say in the plural? Parim, we can understand why he says in the plural. Because you have the two examples, you have two cases in the plural. One is the Jewish Supreme Court and one is the high priest. But when it comes to the se'ir, which is specifically for idolatry, that's only applicable to the Jewish Supreme Court. So this follows the opinion, there is an opinion that every tribe had to bring this atonement. And the majority of the Jewish people sin. It could even be that the majority of the Jewish people are part of one tribe. But if the majority of the Jewish people sin, then every tribe in Israel had to bring its own goat. That's what he says in the plural. But this is not a unanimous opinion. That's what he said. Even though when he says this chapter is unique, that there's no argument, not everything in this chapter is unanimous. Like this detail, se'irim, that the fact that every tribe had to bring a he-goat, that's not unanimous. There's a big argument about that. But here he doesn't mention any arguments. He just says it clearly as if there's no argument. Sidim and Nisrafim. So again, shchitas and batzafim. Where do you slaughter them? It has to be slaughtered in the northern part of the courtyard. The kibul daman, and you have to receive its blood, and the one who's receiving the blood has to be standing, b'kli shares, with a proper utensil, a service vessel that was dedicated to the temple. It's a holy vessel. Batzafim. Also in the northern side of the courtyard, the northern side of the altar. You wouldn't enter into the Holy of Holies, but you would sprinkle the blood in front of the curtain, and you would sprinkle it on the inner altar. This was also the other exception, where they would sprinkle the blood on the inner altar. The blood of an animal would be on the inner altar, but not in the Holy of Holies, which is why he separates it into a different Mishnah. He's going in level. The first level was the highest level is the bull of the high priest on Yom Kippur and the he-goat of Yom Kippur, because that That takes you all the way into the Holy of Holies. You would sprinkle in the Holy of Holies. The next level is the bull, when the Jewish Supreme Court erroneously made an erroneous ruling. And the high priest made an erroneous ruling, which would take you inside the sanctuary. All the other sin offerings were outside the sanctuary. Everything happened outside the sanctuary, only in the outer altar. This was the exception. This was done, everything was done on the inside. The sprinkling was done on the inside in front of the curtain, separating between the Holy and the Holy of Holies, and on the inner altar. Matana achasman ma'akavis. There was just 7 sprinklings in front of the curtain. Each, whatever the Torah requires, is a deal breaker. If you fail to do the exact amount that the Torah requires, it invalidates the sacrifice. Shiri Hadam, what do you do with the leftover blood? You would pour out, I said, my Ravi. Again, as soon as you walk out of the temple, you encountered the western side of the altar with its base. You would pour out, don't throw it, don't smear it, no sprinkling, just pour it out on the base. So it's be'echachitzin of the outer altar. Imle nasan, if you don't end up pouring it, it's not a deal breaker. It does not invalidate the sacrifice. Then he says, Elu ve'elu, both the sin offerings of the first Mishnah of Yom Kippur and these sin offerings that he just mentioned, nisrafim beveis hadashen, they were burnt at the place where ashes were deposited, which was outside of Jerusalem. The outer altar would accumulate a lot of ashes, a lot of sacrifices. The altar was non-stop, burning sacrifices from the morning until the evening, until the afternoon mincha. So it was constant, a lot of sacrifices, a lot of ashes. It would pile up. So they would remove it. When it piled up too much, they would remove it. Where would they take the ashes? So some ashes they would put right on the side. Every morning they would take some ashes and put it on the side of the altar. That's what we learned and we read earlier in the davening. That was just a scoop. But the rest, they would take it where? A place outside Jerusalem, which was a place where all the ashes gathered. So that's where they would burn the animals. They would take it outside the camp and burn the bull after they took out the parts that had to go on the altar, burnt in the altar. Instead of eating the animal, it would all be burnt. But where was it burnt? It wasn't burnt on the altar, it wasn't burnt on the inside, it was burnt outside of Jerusalem, the place where they would collect all the ashes and dump all the ashes. Okay, that's Mishnah 2. Okay, Mishnah 3. And now we come to the third category of a chatas. Chatois hatzibur v'ayochid. The sin offerings of the communal sin offerings and the individual sin offering. If a person sinned, any sin in which there's a penalty in the hands of heaven or your life gets cut off, if you sin unintentionally, you have to bring a sin offering. Then you have the communal sin offerings. So he spells it out. What are the communal sin offerings? Eilen chatois hatzibur. What are the communal sin offerings? Sidei Rosh Chodashim Rishon Me'edes. Every Rosh Chodesh and every holiday they would bring, in addition to all the burnt offerings, which the Torah specifies, each Yom Tov was a certain amount of burnt offerings, they would also bring 1 goat as a sin offering, for a communal sin offering, for the sins of the community. Any sin that involved the sanctity of the temple. Let's say you entered into the temple, someone in the community entered into the temple in a state of unholiness, when you're not allowed to go into the temple. And maybe he's not even aware of it. So the goat that they brought every Rosh Chodesh, 12 times a year, and every holiday, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, and I guess Rosh Hashanah as well, and Yom Kippur, the regular goat that they brought as part of the Musaf, this was an atonement for sins that have to do with impurity for the entire community. Shabbos, there was no sin offering. Shabbos is different than Yom Tov. Shabbos is all holy. There's no sins on Shabbos. No sin offerings on Shabbos. There was a burnt offering. Every Shabbos they brought a burnt offering. To the Musaf was 2 burnt offerings. Every other holiday, every Musaf also includes a sin offering. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot. Shabbos there's no sin offerings on Shabbos. Only burnt offerings. But the burnt offerings on Rosh Chodesh And Yom Tov, part of the Musaf that they added on for the Chodesh and Yom Tov, besides the 2 daily sacrifices every single day, which are burnt offerings in the morning, and to open the sacrifices in the temple, and in the afternoon to conclude the sacrifices in the temple, the Shachris and the Mincha. So on Yom Tov there would be a Musaf, and that they would add to that. And part of the addition, they also had the communal sin offering. So also Shchitas and Batzafen. Where do you slaughter them? On the northern side of the altar. The Kibul Daman, B'chlisharetz Batzafen. You have to receive the blood with a service vessel that's holy in the northern side. V'daman ton arba matana. Here you would have to smear. You don't pour, you don't throw, you don't sprinkle. You smear with your fingers. 4 matanas. 4 sprinklings were made, 4 gifts, arba kranis, on the 4 corners of the altar. We said on the 4 corners you had protruding on top, on each corner protruding a corner which was like an amma. An amma by an amma, so an amma, it's like 1.5 feet protruded. And he explains what happened. He says, Kate said, how did the Kohen do this? He couldn't stand on the floor and smear the 4 corners. It was 15 feet high. If you're on the floor, you can't reach. So Olav Akevish, he would go up on the ramp. There was no steps in the altar. It was only a ramp. You're not allowed to make steps. So he would climb up the ramp. Upana laseveth. The ramp also had 2 small ramps that led from the big ramp in front of the altar. There was a huge ramp from the ground all the way to the top of the altar. There was small ramps that led to the foundation, the base, and then there was another ramp that led to the ledge. Remember we said the altar was made up of 3 parts. First part was a platform, and then it indented, and then the altar, the second part was 5 amma, like 7.5 feet, and then the third part was narrower, so you had like a ledge, you were able to walk around the altar, and that was 3 amma, and then on top of that, you had the corners, which protruded on each corner. So the Kohen would walk around the ledge, would go up the big ramp, and then he would take the small ramp to the ledge, and he would go onto the ledge, and he would come, first he would start out, Lekeren Deremes Mizrach, the southeast side, because the ramp was situated on the southern side. If you go to Jerusalem today, that was the main entrance. The main entrance to the Temple Mount was on the southern side. That's where Jerusalem was. The city of David was in the valley on the southern side. The temple was on the mountaintop. The city of Jerusalem wasn't where it is today, the old city, the old quarters. It was mainly in the valley on the southern side of the temple. And that's where you see the big gates. That's where the majority of Jews would climb up and go. There were gates all around, entrance on all 4 sides, but the main entrance was on the southern side of the Temple Mount. When you entered into the courtyard, that's where the ramp was, to walk up to the altar. So when you go up the altar, it says whenever you turn, you always turn to your right. So if you went on the ledge, you turned to your right, what was the first corner that you bumped into? It was the southeast corner, because you went to your right. Temple, the sanctuary, was on the western side of the courtyard. You were on the eastern side of the courtyard. The eastern side of the courtyard is facing outward. So you are on the southeast corner, and that's when you did your first. The Kohen would dip his finger. He would take his finger together with the middle finger and the thumb, dip it in, and then smear it on the corner, on that protruding corner. Then he would continue on the ledge, and then he would reach Mizrachis Sveinis. He would reach the northeast corner. He was still on the eastern side, facing outwards, and then he arrived on the other side, the northeast corner of the altar. And then he would dip his finger again into the blood, to the basin that he was carrying, and he would smear the northeast corner. Then he would continue, Tzvainis Maravis, he would reach the northwest, which is the corner facing the temple, the sanctuary, and he would smear, and then Maravis Dreimes, fourth and last, he would reach the southwest corner, and he would smear there. Shiri Adam, what did he do with the extra blood? When he went down the altar, he would spill it out on the platform that's sticking out on the southern side. Even though on the southern side you didn't have a platform, but you had a drop. You just had a little strip like an amma jutting out on the southern side. You had the full west, you had the platform sticking out, jutting out of the altar. You had the full north, but on the east side and on the south side, it just like jutted out for like an amma. And that's where he would pour out. Why would he pour it out there? Because just like we read that when you came out of the sanctuary, what do you do with the extra blood? Both in the case of the Yom Kippur sacrifices, the sin offerings, of the bull of the high priest and the goat, the he-goat of the atonement for the Jewish people in Yom Kippur, and when the Jewish Supreme Court made an erroneous ruling, when the high priest made an erroneous ruling, where would you spill out the leftover blood? On the western side, because that was the first thing that you encountered when you came out of the temple. It's right there. You bumped into it, and that's where immediately you pour. So here, when he's coming down the ramp on the southern side, the first opportunity you have, the first part of the platform that you said, the foundation, the platform that you bump into, that's where you pour the blood. But these sin offerings, the sin offering of every individual Jew, where the blood was sprinkled, was on top of the altar, and the sin offering, the communal sin offerings that were offered every Rosh Chodesh and every holiday, they would eat the parts that they didn't burn on the altar. They would be eaten by the priests. So when the cholin, the fnimna kloyim, that were eaten inside the courtyard of the sanctuary, kloyim is referring to the curtains. This is the curtains that were mentioned in the tabernacle in the desert. That's how you know that this is an ancient text that goes back all the way from Moshe at Sinai, directly, as if we're hearing it from Moshe himself. And that's one of the reasons why this was chosen. It's so pure. From the cholin, the fnimna kloyim. So, but the equivalent would be in the temple. It has to be eaten within the courtyard, within the inner courtyard, anywhere in the courtyard. In the inner courtyard. L'zichrei chehuna, only for the male kohanim. B'chol meichel, you can eat it together with any other food. You don't have to eat it exclusively. You can mix it with other food. And in any manner. It doesn't have to be barbecued. Even though ideally it says you should barbecue it, because every sacrifice has to be offered on it has to be like a royal feast, because it's special. But if you prefer to cook it, fine. Whatever your preference is. Whatever you like to eat better. You don't like barbecuing? You're not an American. You like your food cooked well. So fine, whatever it is. And the Yom V'Layla, for day and night, you're only allowed to eat it. There's a time limit. You're only allowed to eat the leftover of the sacrifice. You're not allowed to leave it over. You have to finish eating it the day that you offer the sacrifice. The sacrifice had to be offered in the day. That day and that night. But he says he limits it at chatzos, till midnight. That's rabbinic. The rabbi said that even though the Torah says, really you have to eat it the same day that you achieve the atonement, right? So when does you offer the sacrifice during the day? Seemingly at night, it's already the next day. So maybe I should eat it only during the day and have to finish it by nightfall. He says, no. You can eat it the day and you can continue eating it during the night. Why? Because it says when Hashem created the world, first He created evening, and then first night, and then day. The Jewish day starts with the night, nightfall, at the beginning of the day. All the holidays, we start beginning of the day, and then, but when it comes to sacrifices in the temple, it was the exact opposite. The night follows the day. The night is a continuation of the day. All the leftover sacrifices, you get to burn all night. You can eat the sacrifice, that daily sacrifice, into the night, because the night, it's the same day. When it comes to holiness, the night is a continuation of the day. When it comes to creation, the day starts with the night, because night connotates darkness. So first you start with darkness, and then the sun shines, the sun comes up, the sun pierces the darkness. So you go gradually. First you start in a state of darkness, just like a child. You start ignorant and then you learn. Your mind opens up, you start learning, you start becoming aware. It's a process. That's the process of the world. First you start with darkness and then you work your way to light. But in holiness, the darkness that comes after the day connotates something very deep. The darkness represents the mystery. So first comes the day, when everything is clear and everything is defined and everything is open, and then comes the night. Then you realize, you go deeper into the mystery. Like first you learn the revealed part of the Torah, and then you realize there's so much depth and there's so much hidden mysteries infinite mysteries in every word and letter in the Torah, the night represents something very positive, not something darkness and challenges and difficulties. The dark that comes after the day in the temple, the darkness represents the mystery of Hashem. Hashem sits in darkness because it's beyond our comprehension. It's so deep and profound, and it's a hidden secret and mystery. So in the holiness, the night comes after the day. So that's why the sin offerings have to be eaten immediately the day that you bring the sacrifice. But the day doesn't end until the next morning, because the night follows the day. But the rabbis say you should only eat until midnight, because the rabbis were afraid that, firstly, the night will slip. Before you know it, you think, I'm going to push it off. Being a good Jew, I'll wait. What's the rush? And before you know it, you can fall asleep. And before it's already day. You blew it. You passed your deadline, and now you violated a prohibition, a strict prohibition. Nicer, you left over holy sacrifices that had to be eaten, and it's the eating that achieves the atonement as well. So it's nicer, and if you happen to eat it nicer, your life gets cut off. It's serious stuff. So therefore, the rabbis made a fence, and they said you should eat it by midnight. Also, it's very hard to differentiate between night. At the end of the night, the moment when night ends and the day begins, dawn, it's not exactly so clear. Not everyone could distinguish. If you look in your newspapers, it tells you when sun rises. Sunrise is very easily distinguishable. I can see the sun is rising. But dawn and nighttime, it's not easily distinguishable. It's more like a halachic thing. It's the beginning of the rays, but it's not something that's easily detectable. So therefore, it's very easy to make a mistake. And before you know it, you think you're at the end of the night, and it turns out you already went into the morning and you violated the prohibition. So the rabbis made a clear-cut line, a clear-cut demarcation. It's easy to keep till midnight. Finish it till midnight. But that's only rabbinic. The Alter Rebbe said something very, very profound. The Alter Rebbe says, he interpreted this Mishnah. This Mishnah is talking about sacrifices, but every one of us has an inner temple, and everything that happened in the temple, we offered in our inner temple. All these sacrifices, even though we don't have these animals and we don't physically, technically slaughter animals and receiving blood and sprinkling blood, but all, and offering it in the temple and eating it, but all of these services we find paralleled in our own personal lives, in the spiritual service of Hashem. So he interpreted, he says, Ola v'kevesh. We don't even sense ourselves, our lowliness. The person who's low and coarse and crass is the last person on earth to know how low and coarse and crass they are. The lower you are, the coarser you are, the crasser you are, the more oblivious you are to yourself. Your ego just blocks out any sense of reality, and you become completely delusional about yourself. But when you go up, you start climbing up, all of a sudden you look around and you realize that you look back at where you were and you say, wow. And what happens when a person goes up? When a person elevates himself and starts climbing and going beyond his ego, the reimus is where the warmth is. The reimus is in the south, where all the warmth is. The Alter Rebbe says that's when you start feeling a warmth in your soul, a closeness, a warmth to Hashem. Mizrachis means that the sun starts shining. That's where the sun rises from the east. Then suddenly your life is a little illuminated, a little warmth, a little illumination, because you've climbed up. Olav HaKeves, you climbed up. Then Mizrachis Tzvainis. Then you realize you illuminate your animal soul, Tzvainis, the negative. You realize that where you're at and where you've been, and then you're able to start transforming, to light up even your animal soul. Even your animal soul is also able to start lighting up, to change and to transform your animal soul. Even get your animal soul, your ego soul, your natural soul, also excited about godliness. And then Tzveinus Maravis, once you already get your animal soul also to transform and to start feeling an excitement, a thrill and excitement about godliness, then Maravis. That Maravis comes from the word in Hebrew, sweetness. Ore, sweetness. That Hashem finds very sweet. The Maravis Dreimis, and you have sweetness and warmth. And elsewhere Chassidus says, Ola ba kevesh, kevesh comes from the word to be kovish, to conquer. When a person conquers his urges and his instincts, his rough animal nature, then upanal aseviv, you reach the level of seviv, kolalman. You reach the level of the transcendent light of Hashem. That's the power. When a person subjugates himself and overcomes his natural urges and instincts, and you start changing and transforming your nature and changing your nature and breaking your nature and reaching something higher, this reaches into the level of Seviv Kolalman. Hashem transcends the world. We'll do one more Mishnah. Then he says, Mishnah 4, Ha'ila, the burnt offering, Kodesh Kadashim. It's a sacrifice of the Holy of Holies, the holiest order. The reason he has to spell it out, he didn't say that before when he mentioned the bull of the high priest in Yom Kippur, the he-goat of Yom Kippur. He doesn't start out, Par v'sorir, Sheyem Kippurim, Kodesh Kadashim, or when he talks about the bull that the high court has to bring, and they give an erroneous ruling, the he-goat that they have to bring if it's an erroneous ruling regarding idolatry, or the bull that the high priest has to bring when he gives an erroneous ruling and he follows his own erroneous ruling, or the personal sin offerings or the communal sin offerings. It doesn't start out Kodesh Kadashim for a simple reason, because it's stated clearly in the Torah. When the Torah speaks about all the sacrifices that we mentioned above, the Torah calls it Kodesh Kadashim, Holy of Holies, the holiest sacrifice. You don't have to spell out. When it comes to the burnt offering, the Torah doesn't say anywhere explicitly, doesn't call it Kodesh Kadashim. So he says you should know they are in the same category. Oila is in the same category as the sin offerings. It's Kodesh Kadashim. If a person benefits from this from this animal, from the sacrifice, you rebelled against Hashem, and you have to have a special atonement. They have the status of Kodesh Kadashim, the holiest of the sacrifice. Shchitas batzafin, you have to slaughter it. That's clearly. And we learn the other sacrifices from the burnt offering, that it has to be offered on the northern side of the courtyard. And you also have to receive the blood with a service vessel, a holy vessel, in the northern side of the courtyard of the altar. But here it's different. Here, they wouldn't sprinkle, they wouldn't smear, they wouldn't pour out. Here, you had to throw the blood. But on one hand, the Torah says that you have to throw it all around the altar. But it says you should throw. So how is it possible? You can't throw one throw and reach that the blood should touch all four sides of the altar. It's impossible. And if you would just throw, let's say, on one side of the same side, each extreme of the same side, let's say on the western side, I would throw on the west-south side, and then I would throw on the west-north side. That would only reach three walls: the western side, the northern side, and the southern side, and the northern side. I wouldn't reach the eastern side. So the only way to do it is you have to take two opposite corners, diagonally opposite each other, and throw the blood. When you throw in the corner, some of the blood is going to end up north, some of it will end up west, some of it will end up east, and some of it will end up south. Now, the Torah also teaches us that when you throw the blood, it has to be over the platform, over the foundation. So the southeast corner is out because there's no platform there. Remember, the whole eastern side, there was no platform jutting out in the bottom, and the whole southern side, there was no platform jutting out except a drop on the west side. But on the east side, there was no platform. So that corner is out. You can't start with that corner and then the blood will end up on the east side and on the south side because there's no platform there. It has to be over the platform. So the only two corners you can do that is you start out with the northeastern corner, and then it has a platform there, so you throw the blood, and the blood covers the northern wall of the altar, and it covers the eastern wall of the altar. Then you throw the blood on the southwest corner, and then, which is over the platform. There's a platform there, on that whole corner, because it juts out a little into the south. So then the blood covers the southern wall, and it covers the southern wall, and it covers the western wall. So all four walls are covered by the blood. Get a little of the blood. So he says two. That's what he says. Two gifts that are four. You throw it twice, and one on each corner, and then it ends up splashing and reaching four on all four walls. Utuna efshit. You have to remove the skin. That was the only part of the animal that wasn't burnt. the skin was given to the kohanim. That was the gift to the kohanim. V'nituach, and then after you skin the animal, you would cut it up, and v'cholol ishim, and you would burn everything on the altar. It's called the burnt offering. The burnt offering, everything oila. Oila, the previous Rebbe also said, means to go up. The whole purpose of a sacrifice is when a person is sacrificing and a person is praying, which is a substitute of a sacrifice, it's about elevating yourself, lifting yourself up. That's why there's also the fire. Fire goes up. It's to elevate yourself, to change, to get out of your ego, to get out of your skin, to get out of yourself, to elevate yourself. That's the whole theme, that's the whole purpose of the sacrifices. From the bottom up, to elevate ourselves and to come close to Hashem.